Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural version of Humane Connect and our first webinar. I appreciate everybody that's here. Tonight, we're going to talk about peer support. What is it and why do we need it? Just a quick background, just so you know, I have a little bit behind me as I move forward on this. I graduated with my master's in divinity in 2016 from Northern Seminary. I'm a board member here at Humane Connect. I was the executive, or I am the current executive director of First Responder Peer Initiative, uh, a group I've established a couple of years ago, mostly for the purpose of training others. I was the executive director of Illinois Firefighter Peer Support for just over 5 years, leading that group, kind of a statewide training group for peer support within Illinois. I've also had the opportunity to train in about a half a dozen different states to help other peer teams establish themselves, but always within the first responder realm. 30 plus years in the fire service. I'm currently serving as a captain in Evanston, Illinois, and looking forward to retirement in a couple of years. Retirement from that, I have other plans, but uh, my time in the fire service is coming to a close. So, as I mentioned, tonight we're going to talk about peer support, and the two things we're going to talk about is why we need it and what is it. So, why do we need peer support? It's very interesting, as I'm sure most of you are aware. Uh, we go to get our annual physicals, especially they recommend 50 and up an annual. Prior to being 50, it's a biannual physical checkup, and they run blood work and do all this stuff just to see how you're doing. My dentist wants me in there every 6 months, pry at my gums and do all that stuff. But how often do we go in for a mental health checkup, right? That's an area where people, and not everybody, some people are good about it, but most of us just don't do mental health checkups. And we can see this in a lot of ways. I think that we see this when you see people that are overly stressed at work, they don't know where to turn. You see people overly stressed at home and they don't know where to turn, right? They're, if we got a backache that lasts more than a week, we're making an appointment to go see the doctor. But if we're struggling with some depression, do we even recognize that we're struggling with that? And do we know where to go or do with that, right? And so that's why I really feel that this need for peer support uh, is so valuable right now. So what are your typical response when we see somebody struggling? How hard is it to ask someone if they're okay? How often do you take that initiative to ask someone if it's a coworker? Sometimes even family members, we're not really sure how to handle it. So, what keeps us from making that first step of asking? And honestly, I think oftentimes it's a fear. Uh, One of the biggest fears, I think, anyways, is the fear of having to fix it. So if I ask, we'll make up a character Joe. That's my favorite name just to make a character is Joe. If I ask Joe what's going on and he tells me XYZ, what if I can't fix XYZ? What if I don't have the right thing to say? And that holds us back. And so I tie that together with the fact that the next line there says our expectations versus their expectations. And what I mean by that is our expectations is that if someone needs help, I'm going to have to fix them. Now, the problem with that is we can't fix each other. I can't fix my fictional character. I can't fix my wife. I can't fix my kids. And the only person that can fix me is me. But our expectations are that if I ask if I can help or listen, what if they give me a problem and I can't fix it? However, what do you think their expectations are? Think about a time when you were in a bad place. Were you looking for someone to fix you, or were you looking for someone just to listen and acknowledge your existence? And what you'll find if you get into this peer support realm and you start assisting people is when I talk to people, probably 99% of the time, they know what they have to do. They don't have the energy to do it because they feel alone. So again, our expectations is I have to fix it, but theirs is I just wish someone would listen to me. So why does it work? This is a old like from the BC times. Because we're all human, nothing human is foreign to me. Meaning that there's nothing that you could bring to me that is a human being I haven't probably experienced in some way. We all have these same experiences. And one of the things that we struggle with, and I'll get to this a little bit later, but we struggle with isolation because we always think we're the only ones that are going through these things. So it also works because we all desire connection. This can be the catalyst to really help our fellow man. We need to help one another. And all of us, well, again, we'll get to this in depth a little bit more, but all of us desire a human connection. And then finally, it doesn't take anything special to help one another. It takes a listening ear, an opportunity to stop and acknowledge someone. So, what is it? Peer support is an emotional and practical support between two people who share an experience. That could be job struggles. I'm struggling to say struggles. Job struggles, relationship issues, or past traumas. I mean, it can be anything, right? But as soon as you have that commonality, that gives you an opportunity to be a listener, to be a support. You're someone that has lived through something that can offer an opportunity for someone else to be able to share their experience, knowing that you've made it through and so can I. And all of us have our own life histories that we can share. So, peer perspective, peer support is about creating mental health, but mental health is not the opposite of mental illness. And what I mean by that is that while peer support can is about creating mental health, it doesn't mean if we don't have that we have a mental illness. It's we can't look at this like it's an on-off switch, like you're either on this side with mental health or this side with mental illness. It's all think of it like it more of like a thermostat, a dial, right? We dial up and we dial down where we're at day to day. Think about different stressors. You're driving to work and you get a flat tire. Well, that starts it, right? And well, maybe for me, a flat tire isn't that big of a deal. I got AAA, they're gonna come change it. I got mine at whatever the discount tire, and it's guaranteed. Not that big of a deal. Maybe, maybe I'm a single father, and that's one of four tires that's bald, and I can't afford tires. Well, that dial's going to go way up, right? So that stress, that mental health, that mental wellness, if you will, is a gauge from top to bottom or side to side, right? More of a dial. So, what if we looked at mental health simply as one's ability to feel connected while continuously learning and growing? I just love that explanation, actually, of being a peer. Because oftentimes, and we'll get into this a little bit too, we look at peer support as I need to step in again to help fix you, which A, I can't. B, it's not a giving. It's not a give, it's a give and take back and forth. And oftentimes it's looked as like if I'm a peer supporter, I'm coming in because I got my crap together and I'm going to help you get your crap together. Well, no, actually, none of us all have our crap together. Let's talk about this and let's work on this together, and we'll both learn from it. And one of the best examples I can always give is uh, when I was in my younger days, when I was on an ambulance, I loved teaching new paramedics because I was very good on the street. I knew my patient care. I could read people really quick. I got all that. But the SOPs that we followed were always changing, right? But when I was precepting, it would be a give and take. Like the person, the new medic would be like, oh, well, in school we learned this and this. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. That's right. So it's a give and take, and it's like that with just about everything that we do. And then finally, it's a creative process rather than a coping process. And I like that too, because life isn't meant just to be coped with. Life should be creative and enjoyable, and it should be always expanding, learning and growing, right? And so I like that description of it's a creative process, not a coping. Any questions about any of this so far? Okay, I don't see any hands. I'll
Tom,
keep going.
Tom, I had a
Yeah,
question, if that's all right.
yeah, of course.
Um, you've been a first responder for a number of years, and you've provided peer support services specifically tailored to first responder communities.
Correct.
As you've prepared this webinar and you've done the work presenting this to the general public for maybe the first time, yeah, you might have presented to the general public before, but
Nope.
kind of more in an official capacity, right?
Yeah.
And so, did you prepare these slides differently than you would have for the first responders in a material way, or did you was are most of the concepts going to be the same that you would present to the general public?
The concepts are the same. Some of the phraseology, if you will, is a little different. I want to be sure that I used words and common language that everyone would understand.
Yeah.
I wanted to avoid those kind of, all of us, and what I don't care what industry you're in, we all have like phraseology that only we would know, right? As a shared partner in that field.
So
So
I guess my follow-up question to that is, do you believe in a peer support community that could be a peer support community for everybody under one roof?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can, if I were to get paired up with someone that I wouldn't even know because I've worked this crazy schedule and in the fire service for 30 years. Um, so there's aspects, if I was to be connected with someone that worked in an office, there's aspects of that I probably wouldn't be able to quite a little bit understand, but not really know, right? Because it's not my lived experience.
Yeah.
However, uh, I have a son and daughter that I've raised, and they're both, 30 and 33 now. Um, I can talk about that, right? If you're a father and you're trying to figure out how to relate to your daughter, yeah, let's talk about that. I don't know if I have all the answers on that one, but I can definitely tell you how things I did with my kids that worked. So
Yeah.
does that help? They're
That does. That's excellent. And I love your quote. I was going to ask you maybe later if I can quote you that none of us have our crap together.
yeah,
I mean
that's an official quote.
that
Yeah.
I'll get a different quote from you. You probably don't want to be quoted saying that, but I
No,
love
I'm
it.
I'm good for it. I'm good for it.
All right. Well, thank you. That's a
Yeah, yeah.
question.
Anything else? All good. Keep going.
All good.
So, if anybody has any thoughts, I do have a question. What do you think peer support would include? I mean, when you think about peer support, are there any things that you think it specifically includes? And I pose this because, as you may be able to see, I have the boundaries book there. If and I highly recommend if you're going to be involved with peer support, the boundaries book by Cloud and Townsend is a very good read. Because as peer supporters, we tend to have an innate, and like in our personality, that we're fixers, and having good boundaries is really important in peer support.
Uh, Tom, I would to answer your question, I would say it includes what you were talking about earlier, that we don't need to go into the peer support group thinking we need to fix anything. So
Correct.
if we're thinking we need to fix something, that could be crossing a boundary with somebody. If
Hmm.
we offer at the very end of somebody sharing something very personal, some unsolicited advice, that could do more damage than good, and we want to be careful with that.
That is correct. And so honestly, one of the main reasons I have this slide in here is because uh, when we start working with peers, oftentimes they can be in kind of a bad spot, if you will, right? And what we want to be careful of is that we have good established boundaries of what my peer support includes, but also what does it not include. Um, a lot of the teaching that I've done has been in a setting where people are oftentimes going to be face to face doing peer support. And so I remind people like, hey, you could get someone that's in a real bad way, and they could be like, man, I could really use $20 for groceries. And being that fixer, you're in this giving mentality, like, hey, I really need to help this person. It could be easy for us to dig in our pocket and pull out $20. And my caution to that is, as someone that's worked with a lot of peers and a lot of homeless, I never give cash to anybody, period. End of story. Um, don't forget they're in a bad way. And maybe it's just an emotional situation. Maybe there's also a drinking problem, or maybe there's a drug problem, or you name it. If someone really needs groceries, like I'll take you to the store and I'll get you some groceries if that's where we're at. But you don't want to be given cash. You don't want to come over to their house and help them roof their house because they need a new roof, right? Like I exaggerate that a little bit, but just to make that point, that remember and be very cognizant of when you think about peer support, what does it include and what does it not include? And then, of course, I include what would be a good outcome versus a bad outcome. And I'll help keep this moving tonight, but obviously a good outcome is, you meet a couple times and things get better, you high five each other and things are great, right? And you check in every now and then. That's great. But we have to be cognizant that there could be a bad outcome. I've had in my time when I ran the peer organization, I had two that were bad, and they both ended in the loss of a life, and it was devastating. But I also knew that I did everything I could, and I don't say that to freak anybody out because what I was doing was a little more specialized and a little more high intensity. However, that that always exists. And so that's something as a peer supporter you have to be aware of and be ready for that, right? Like if it is a bad outcome, what are you going to do for your own support? Even if it's not a bad outcome to that extent, be sure I don't have this in my notes anywhere, but as a peer supporter, you want to make sure that you have your own social network for support if you need it doing peer support. And
Tom, could I ask a question in
yeah,
regard to that?
yeah.
If this is too sensitive to bring up on this webinar, feel free to decline this question. But how did you self-care after the unfortunate loss of those two people, of them losing their lives to
Oh, no,
their own
no, that's
lives?
not at all. I work really hard to maintain a pretty tight circle of my go-tos, right? A couple of them are firefighters. I'm really blessed with knowing Jay on the meeting here tonight. He's my sorry, Jay, you're my token one non-firefighter good friend that I can reach out to. That I always tell other first responders, like, have one person that's not a first responder you can talk to. Jay's my guy. But even more at that time, I didn't know Jay back then, but uh, we had a clinical director, Dr. Christy McInnes, who was phenomenal. And so I could just call her and her and I would just kind of talk it through. So that was just part of that was my network. And while it was nothing official on paper, I had it.
Well, if you don't mind, I have
Yeah.
another question in follow up to that. If you didn't have those people in your life to pick up the phone and call after you just experienced losing somebody over the phone with them taking
Mhm.
their own life,
Well, I didn't lose
how
them
much
over
of a
the
difference would
phone. It
that be?
wasn't like a one-on-one. It was someone I was working with, and then I couldn't get a hold of them. And then, which again, in peer support, that happens. You can start having interactions, and they can just change their mind, and they drop off the map, right? And then
Yeah,
I found out a couple weeks later that this person had taken his life.
yeah.
So if I didn't have that, all I can say is you need to get that. I
Yeah.
mean, even outside of this, all of us should have a good social network because we all remember the dial. You know, we all have those days where we just need someone to bounce off of.
I was just sharing because these last 2 weeks, I've had a roller coaster, a bit of a roller coaster last 2 weeks with just some things happening in just personal life. And
Yeah,
it made such a difference being able to pick up the phone and call someone like Jay and call someone like my brother or my friend or meeting up for lunch and talking about this stuff. I can tell you, I've gone through hard things without it, and now that I've gone through it with it, I can say it's so much
yeah.
better to go through it with good people around you.
Well, and we'll touch on this a little bit, but one of the, if you will, the magic of peer support is when people are allowed to actually verbally say what they're thinking, it allows them to put their pieces back together.
Yeah.
That's why oftentimes, like if it's something that's been kind of a traumatic, and it doesn't have to necessarily be trauma, but traumatic for you, you'll say that story a few times, and then each time you do it, a few more of those puzzle pieces come together. And then once you get enough of those puzzle pieces together that you've kind of you've wrapped your head around it, you'll be done talking about it.
Yeah.
I'm done. I got this now, right? And we've probably all felt that in some way.
Well, thank
So,
you.
yeah, of course. And then finally, what do you get out of this? And I include that because almost like we talked about a slide or two earlier, this isn't a one-sided thing, right? When we do peer support, you get your own personal growth out of this, and there is a satisfaction of being able to help someone and see someone that was struggling, and and it's funny, like I can't tell you how many times I had someone tell me like, "Oh man, you did great, and you did this," and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, I didn't really say anything except wow, oh man, that must be right. It it's so it's a good feeling that you were able to assist a fellow human to feel better and get back on the road of good mental wellness. So what is peer support? This is international peer support by Sherry Mead. This is a model that I follow. It's pretty simple. That's why I like it. I like simple and I like flow charts. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's kind of what this does. So real simple. We'll move through each one, but it's task one is connection. Task two is worldview. Task three is, and this is, there's a few words in the English language that just don't come out. Mutuality. Whew, I got it that time. And then the fourth is moving towards, and we'll go through each one of these. So task one is connection. This is the core of peer support. However you approach connection, we are all wired for connection, whether you approach it psychologically, sociologically, or theologically, we're wired for connection. And if you think we're not, one of what my wife and I watched, I think there's a couple new seasons out, but we were watching this show called Alone. And it's, as the name says, they take a person and put them out in the forest somewhere completely alone. And I think they start with 10 of them, and whoever lasts the longest gets $500,000. And they get like 10 items, and they're all like nature people, and they do all this stuff. However, if you ever watch that show, the majority of them quit as soon as they start getting lonely. Like I've watched multiple people get medically extracted because they've lost so much weight from not eating, and they'll just stick it out. But all of a sudden you'll see someone, they'll start talking about their wife or their kids or their mom or whatever. And as soon as they're like, oh, here it goes, man. He's going down that spiral, right? Because we all desire that human interaction. And so that's one of the first key component then is that connection. So we know that people need and want that connection. The easiest way for us to establish that connection, and I don't have much in here on this because we're a little limited tonight, and maybe we'll pick another night for this one, but vulnerability. The best way to establish connection with someone is to open yourself up just a little bit, right? And again, think of it as scale. Like I'm not gonna meet a peer for the first time and just dump everything and be completely open about my entire life. But I'm going to be a little vulnerable. And it's like a dance. When you're a little vulnerable, they'll be a little vulnerable. And then you're vulnerable back and forth, and then it grows. And then you get that connection that grows, right? And this is important because trauma causes disconnection. Trauma makes, and again, I use the word trauma, but I don't necessarily mean like physical trauma. There's a lot of things that can be traumatic. I mean, let's just all pause for a minute and think about how traumatic those 2, 3 years through COVID were, right? There's a lot of different aspects to that, that wherever you stand, as if, as a doctor or politically or any of that, there was a lot of trauma involved with that. It was splitting families, it was creating division, right? So this causes division though, because it causes isolation, I should say. It causes isolation because what happens is when we view something as being traumatic, the other thing that we also do is we think we're the only one experiencing that at the time. And
Tom,
so
is it
what
okay if I
happened?
ask a question about some of
Yeah,
this?
go ahead. Go ahead.
With you've been a firefighter for a number of years, and you're around groups that are, I would say, tougher than other groups out there, and that's been a big part of your life. As
Mhm.
far as men, I guess in particular, but even women. But do you have any tips or tricks for somebody to tap into their vulnerability for maybe even the first time as they're exercising their self-awareness muscles and trying to develop them?
Not really. I think the only tip I can give you is that you need to be vulnerable first. If you're not willing to take that first step, meeting with a peer, they're likely not, unless they're just like ready to dump and explode. But if you see someone that's struggling and you've seen them kind of starting to self-isolate and you want to make that connection, that you're gonna have to open up with a little bit of vulnerability
So
in
it's
some
more
way.
so for the person on stable ground, so to speak, to go and
Yeah.
offer a piece of themselves to maybe somebody else that's struggling to kind of jumpstart
Or,
it.
well, I don't know if I would say the person on stable ground. It's more so for the person that just doesn't want to open up.
Yeah, that's a better way to word it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you can, like we've all seen that person that we know is struggling. And you're like, man, I wish I could talk to them. I don't know how to get them to open up. Well, usually the best way is not by saying you need to share that. It's, this one time, right? And then share a
Yeah.
little bit of your own piece of vulnerability. Now, that's super risky, of course, because they could tell you to go pound sand and it could be, hey, you know what? Tom told me this about him. Like, oh, there it goes. So that's why I say you don't just dump your whole life out, but you start with a little piece of vulnerability so that it affords them an opportunity to be vulnerable as well.
That's a great answer. Thank you for answering.
Yeah. So again, when we have these experiences, we oftentimes think that we're the only ones going through them. So if we can offer up that little bit of vulnerability and then start talking, and then what happens is, uh, one of the phrases I always use, especially like for us in the fire service, but it normalizes abnormal situations. Because again, when we view something or a person views something as a traumatic event, whatever that might be, they see it as it's something out of their norm already. So as soon as you can start to normalize it, that's that first step to them starting to get their life back together. So then how do we create connection? Listen, right? Give that vulnerability and listen. Allow people that opportunity to really talk. And listening will be a future webinar, that we can do a full thing on listening for sure. I'll just throw this out there real quick. One of my favorite authors on listening is Patrick King. He's got, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 books. Uh, no offense to Mr. King there. I found, after a couple, like I found him kind of repetitive. So you could probably pick up, just look at the Amazon highlights and pick the best one. But I thought it was a very an easy read, if you will, with good tips. So the second task of peer support is worldview. helping each other understand how we've come to know what we know. Now, this can be really tricky because um, all of us, I mean, I think we're all pretty aware at this point that we all view the world through a lens that we've created and has been created for us, right? Uh, not to put on my doctor hat here because I'm not one, but I would say it all stems from our childhood because but it's true, right? Like so many things that happen to us in childhood and that dominates our thinking even to today is someone sitting here in their late 50s. I know that, right? And so I have a certain way of viewing the world. And so one of the mistakes that we can often make is we assume when we're talking with other people, they also see the world as we see it. And so what happens is it creates a conflict of people that don't understand that same language because I'm using a word that everybody should know, right? It can also play off in a way that like using specific language is important and asking what people mean by certain words helps you understand their worldview. So one of the examples I've always used is if I'm working with a peer and they're like, wow, I've had a bad run. I just wish tomorrow would be better. What does better mean? Right? Because you could be working with someone that's, I mean, again, to go back to the example of that someone that's suicidal, better could be following through with suicide. Better could mean winning the lottery. Better could mean uh, I just want to be able to get up and not feel like punching my wall tomorrow. So language is important to help understand people's worldview of what they're thinking and seeing in that moment. So I always recommend it when you're doing peer support, always ask people for examples. So if they say they'd like to see XYZ, oh, that's interesting. Could you explain it a little better? I'd really like to understand more of that. So always, always, always follow up with questions and ask like probing deeper questions. So the other example I like to use for worldview, Jonathan Haidt has a book called Righteous Mind. It's kind of a thick read, but it was very interesting. And here's the probably under 5 minute big takeaway that it was just it just altered my view of how I view how other people make decisions. And he uh describes people as having moral foundations, and those moral foundations are like the taste buds on our tongue. So for me, I don't like vinegar. I don't like anything sour. It's just nasty. You give me an ice cream cone or a Hershey's bar, I'm all in, man. I love the sweet. And that when it hits the taste buds on my tongue, that's what I like. And that's how he describes our moral foundations, that each of us have a balance of where we fall with our moral foundations. So he describes them as six different moral foundations. It's care, harm, fairness, cheating, liberty, oppression, loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, sanctity, and degradation. So, for instance, I won't go through all these, but like so the first one is care harm. So we love attachment, protection, and empathy, and we hate injury, suffering, and pain. So for instance, let's say that I'm a care harm person, and that is part of my moral foundation that I gravitate to most. Now, if it was a perfect world, according to Jonathan Haidt, we would have a balance of all six of these, but we don't. We all fall in different areas. So for instance, again, let's say that I'm really big about care harm. I might be really concerned about the homeless people on the street, like more than others. Like I need to find them a place to live, and I'm going to go over this because I care so much. Like I've attached myself to what they have going on, and I can't stand that they're injured or suffered or whatever. Well, someone that's maybe more inclined to number two is like, well, this is kind of justice and this is how it works. And so it's not that either's right or wrong. it's a lens in which they view the world and the way they make their decisions. So I hope that helps a little bit when we think about it really helped me because especially I don't know if I can describe this right, but the firehouse I'm at, the typical one is either there's two stations, one is 8 of us, the other one's 6 of us, and uh, we all have different backgrounds. And we're together. I work a 24-hour on schedule and 48 hours off. So for 24 hours, uh, some might say I'm stuck with these guys for 24 hours, but we have to, and every third day we do it again. So we have to figure out a way to balance all uh, uh, these moral views so that we can be cohesive. But this really helped me understand, you think about why a person just goes like crazy over this one subject. Well, you can, when you start looking at their moral foundations, you can be like, oh man, that's why that person really values this. And that can also be helpful if you're trying to uh, build a better connection with a peer. As we talked about, like a little bit of vulnerability and allow them to talk. If you kind of have an idea of what these are in the back of your head, you might see where a person leans towards one direction. And that's a way for you to build a little bit of connection with them. So, task 3, mutuality, that word I struggle with, redefining help as a co-learning and growing process. And this is really important. You want your peer to understand that, hey, uh, I didn't show up with a cape. I'm not here to rescue you. But man, I've been, again, to use my quote, I've been through some crap. Let's let's see if we can pull this together and let's talk about this. Uh, you want to be able to connect and this is a balance, you want to be able to connect your peers' experiences with your own, but you don't want to overshine them, right? Oh yeah, I had that happen. Oh, I've done that 3 times. Like yeah, that's you're going to shut down the conversation. The focus needs to be on the peer, but helping create that connection, it gives you some credibility. Does that make sense? You want to establish some credibility without taking the spotlight.
Tom, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
With people that kind of get into this competitive nature between, trying to share the biggest trauma or whatever it is that they're sharing in these types of groups, what do you think triggers that? As far as is it the competitive nature in us, or is it something else that we can't just sit and listen for what somebody's trying to share and needing to share and have their feelings validated, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to I don't want to get over my skis because as I stated at least once, I'm not a doctor. However, from a little bit that I've read, oftentimes that competitive nature is bred out of something from childhood. They're still trying to accomplish something they couldn't with their father or
Yeah.
whatever. That's one where area it comes from. I'm sure there's other areas that competitive thing can come from. So I don't want to officially speak to that, but I know I've read about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I know that's kind of a offhand question there, but
Yeah, no, but I mean
more of a random
that
question.
that can be a challenge, right? If you're working with a peer and you'll get that feeling where they're trying to one up you. And in my advice in that situation would be to let it ride. Like you don't want to, you can challenge them, but you'll be done with peer support,
Yeah.
right?
Thank
Because
you.
you're going to cut it off at that point. Doesn't mean you have to accept everything they say. Just, I think what I would do in that situation is probably just make that mental note. All right, they feel very challenged. So what you would want to do is keep your bar real low because I don't want to push them to that place. I want them to talk, but not push them to a place where they feel they have to be competitive. Over time, if you're meeting with someone over a period of time, eventually that's probably something you could broach that subject of, hey, I noticed this. Is everything okay? You know, so but yeah, so finally that mutuality is you're not alone. I've been there too. We'll get through this. And then finally, task four is moving towards. And I find this one to be really important because what you'll find is that oftentimes people will get themselves stuck in where they're at. And and the problem with not moving towards something is it's pretty simple. Either you're moving towards something or you're stuck in something, right? So, and I'm not saying that it's in the first 10 minutes, you're like, boy, we got to start thinking about tomorrow. You have to allow the person to talk and think about and understand what's going on. But at a certain point, you need to start becoming future focused. And that could be as simple as, again, like I said earlier, like, oh, wow. Well, if tomorrow was better, what's one thing that could happen tomorrow that would make tomorrow better? And that just allows them to start thinking a little bit, right? And the quote I have there is most of our conversations are about what's not working. But when we're, oh boy, I can't, I cut it off with the screen here. 1 second. But when we're moving away from what's not working, we stay tied to the problem. When we're moving towards what we want, we can create the beliefs and actions that we need to get there. And there's an organization, I know they're in Chicago and they're in some other places as well, called, it doesn't matter, but their logo, their mantra is always, it's okay not to be okay. And I kind of like that, but I wish they'd follow up with for today, for today. And maybe even tomorrow, right? If you're going through something, it might be a few days. But the question to ask is how many days before it's too much or too many, right? But it's okay to not be okay for a day. Tomorrow, we're going to do something different. And then the other thing, when we talk about moving towards, I like to ask, and again, not on the first time, but how do we grow through this pain, right? When you've heard like post-traumatic growth or anything, we always grow through whatever we go through. I read a good book and I really like this concept, and it was organized. It was referring actually to stress, but it was talking about being organized, disorganized, reorganized. And that really is the cycle of life, isn't it? Like we get all of our stuff all organized and everything's going great. And then something comes around and just mucks it all up and it's all disorganized. Well, we have to stop and reorganize that, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, we have to reorganize that. And that doesn't mean we're going to get back to where we were in the beginning at organized. It's a new organized. It's always evolving, but we have to continually do that. And as soon as we get reorganized, guess what? Reorganization just comes along again and mucks it up. So it's a continuous life cycle. Um, but again, these are things that we grow through. So again, it's connection, worldview, mutuality, and then finally moving towards. Peer support, start it now. Don't be afraid to ask someone. Always ask twice. The first time it's always, yo, oh, hey, how you doing? I'm doing good, right? That's always the standard answer. But if you stop and look them in the eye and say, no, really, how are you today? Might be surprised what they say. Always have a few go-to resources. This is again being a first responder for so many years. I assume everything's going to go south, right? Um, and when I say have a few resources, have a backup. If you're going to be active in peer support, you may get that one person that you're like, man, this is above me, right? Like this is beyond my skis. I'm here to listen and I'll help, but you can tell like this person needs a clinician or XYZ. So I always encourage people to have a couple resources in your back pocket. Uh, if someone's in a position or a place where they need those resources, your window of opportunity is small. If you tell them, hey, I'll check the few and get you a clinician, and you try back in 4 days, that the ship has probably sailed in most cases. Honestly, in my case, when people reached out to me for help, my window, I tried to respond within 15 minutes. Now, now that's a bit extreme. First responders have this thing because every time tones go off, we run out the door. We expect the entire world to immediately act for us as well, right? That's just one of our personality traits that we pick up on. But have something that at least, oh, hey, I got this list of clinicians. I'll get it to you by the end of the day, or and also the other, depending on what level of care you're doing with your peer support, I would encourage you, hey, if you want to give a call, if you want me, I'll drive you there. If you haven't been to a clinician, I can talk to you about what happens, what to expect. I'll even talk to you afterwards. Help them through that process, even though it's maybe beyond your level. Uh, that human piece is not beyond your level. You can help walk them through that. And then lastly, always, always, always follow up. I always tell people it's never just a one and done. Maybe it was for them, but you know what? Always tell people, hey, it was great. It was great connecting, man. This is great. Hey, mind if I check in? You want to either plan a second time to connect again, or hey, man, you mind if I'm going to check in on you in a couple days or end of the week, depending on the level of what your conversation was. If it was more critical, you might want to do it in a day. If it's any sooner than a day, you're way past your skis and you should be getting that clinician going. But yeah, so follow up in a couple days and just, hey, everything's still good. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to respond, yeah, it was great, man. Thank you so much. Or maybe not, right? But that allows that. If you don't follow up, they just might not reach out again. So how to get started? Uh, Email Cody. That's a great way to start. I did not put the website is the Humane Connect at the bottom.
Yeah,
Uh,
at the bottom.
if you have any questions, uh, I'm always available as well. Give me a shout. I'd be glad to help. Any other questions about the material from today?
Tom, this was excellent. I thank you for putting this together. This really was informative, and all the work that you put into just becoming an effective peer supporter is very evident in the books you've read and the amount of time you put into this. And I think we're very lucky to have you with Humane Connect. And I'm
I'm glad to
very,
be here.
very interested in having this with my full support going forward, and to be as involved as involved as possible. So thank you, Tom.
Yeah,
It was
thank
very
you.
good, Tom. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tom.
I am going to stop the recording.